U.S. vows it will never accept a nuclear North Korea after new missile test. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson vowed Tuesday that the U.S. would never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea, while U.S. and South Korean forces held joint ballistic missile drills after the communist nation successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. Tillerson also called for all nations to fully implement United Nations sanctions against North Korea, saying global action is required to stop a global threat. Meanwhile, the U.S. military said it had conducted a precision firing demonstration off the coast of the Korean peninsula in response to what it called North Korea's destabilizing and unlawful actions.
The regime says that launch was a first for the nation, an intercontinental ballistic missile they claim can strike anywhere and anyone in the world. This was the announcement on North Korean state television. And now China and Russia are proposing a deal to try and smooth over rising tensions in the regions. We start with Lucas Tomlinson live from the Pentagon. Lucas, we heard the claims yesterday, last night, our time, from the North Koreans about this ICBM. What is the Pentagon saying?
Well, good afternoon, Leland. U.S. officials are now confirming that North Korea successfully tested for the first time a long-range intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, capable of hitting Alaska, something top officials have long feared.
The threat is much more immediate now. And so it's clear that we can't repeat the same approach, failed approach of the past. So the president has directed us to not do that and to prepare a range of options, including a military option, which nobody wants to take, right?
The Pentagon now says this latest North Korean missile could travel over 4,000 miles. North Korea uses a much higher trajectory than a real-world launch, which top officials say can threaten the United States.
In my view, it's a matter of time. They're demonstrating continued increase in capability, range, altitude, and capacity. We have to assume that the capability exists today to attack the United States.
In May, the U.S. Missile Defense Agency successfully shot down an ICBM in outer space in a test to see if the U.S. could bring down a rogue North Korean missile. A long-range missile launched from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific was successfully intercepted by a kill vehicle fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And in a show of force, for the first time since the 1990s, the Pentagon ordered 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups off the Korean peninsula last month. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta says there are other options available as well.
We do have covert capabilities, and I think it would be wise for the United States to use those covert capabilities as a way to continue to undermine the North Korean government.
The Trump administration is now weighing the next steps and options to deal with North Korea's first successful test of a long-range missile. Leland?
Well, a moment in time indeed. Lucas Tomlinson, great reporting.
Pentagon spokesman Dana White also condemned the missile test and reiterated that we remain prepared to defend ourselves and our allies and to use the full range of capabilities at our disposal against the growing threat from North Korea. President Trump did not directly mention North Korea or the missile launch during his Independence Day remarks at a picnic for military families on the South Lawn of the White House. However, he did note that we do have challenges, but we will handle those challenges. Believe me. U.S., South Korean and Japanese officials say the North Korean missile flew for about 40 minutes and reached an altitude of 1,500 miles, which would be longer and higher than any similar North Korean test previously reported. It also covered a distance of about 580 miles. North Korea after new missile test published July 4, 2017. Fox News now playing U.S. confirms Korea successfully launched ICBM. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson vowed Tuesday that the U.S. would never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea, while U.S. and South Korean forces held joint ballistic missile drills after the communist nation successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. Tillerson also called for all nations to fully implement United Nations sanctions against North Korea, saying global action is required to stop a global threat. Meanwhile, the U.S. military said it had conducted a precision firing demonstration off the coast of the Korean peninsula in response to what it called North Korea's destabilizing and unlawful actions. Pentagon spokesman Dana White also condemned the missile test and reiterated that we remain prepared to defend ourselves and our allies and to use the full range of capabilities at our disposal against the growing threat from North Korea. President Trump did not directly mention North Korea or the missile launch during his Independence Day remarks at a picnic for military families on the South Lawn of the White House. However, he did note that we do have challenges, but we will handle those challenges. Believe me. U.S., South Korean and Japanese officials say the North Korean missile flew for about 40 minutes and reached an altitude of 1,500 miles, which would be longer and higher than any similar North Korean test previously reported. It also covered a distance of about 580 miles. A veteran North Korea watcher told Fox News Tuesday that the missile was fired from a mobile launcher, making such tests more difficult for the U.S. to track and disrupt. "This is the big story we have all been waiting for," Professor Bruce Bechtel of Angelo State University in Texas wrote in an email. "All of the paradigms have changed. It is now time to see what action the USA will take." Bechtel added that the mobile launcher nearly destroys our warning time and also means that the North Koreans have a real shot at launching this system at us without us being able to destroy it on the ground.
By North Korea, a top priority for President Trump as he attends his first G20 summit this week in Germany. The other will be his first face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The president will also pay a visit to NATO member Poland, where they're looking for reassurances of the defense alliance intentions from Moscow.
The fact that President Trump has got his own forces here on ground in Poland, and that he invested more in the financially also in the security of our region, and that he prolongs the financial support for this presence of his troops in Poland towards more than that was intended previously.
Kristen Fisher is live in Warsaw, Poland. Kristen, let's begin with the North Korean missile test. How is the president responding?
Well, Molly, President Trump is really responding by putting a lot of pressure on North Korea's neighbors, and he's going to be meeting with a lot of those nations' leaders at the G20 summit a little bit later this week. But let's take a look at what President Trump said earlier today on Twitter. He said, quote, "North Korea has just launched another missile. Does this guy have anything better to do with his life?" Hard to believe that South Korea and Japan will put up with this much longer. Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all. You know, President Trump has said repeatedly that the time for strategic patience is over. The problem is that when it comes to North Korea, there are no good options, and that's been said repeatedly by many experts and many folks within the Trump administration as well. Molly?
Kristen, there are some highly anticipated meetings. What do you expect will be the highlights of President Trump's second foreign trip?
Well, I think you can expect to see two big moments out of this trip. The first is going to take place on Thursday here in Poland when President Trump speaks directly to a big crowd of Polish people, and he's going to be speaking in an outdoor square, the same square that was used really as the center for the uprising against Nazi occupation back in 1944. So that'll be a big moment. And then the other big moment will take place on Friday at the G20 summit in Germany, the first face-to-face meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump. The problem facing President Trump is that both of those audiences want two totally different things. You know, Poland sits right on the border with Russia. It's very wary of Moscow. So they want President Trump to really reconfirm its commitment to NATO, especially the alliance's military buildup in Eastern Europe, which ramped up after Russia-backed forces invaded Ukraine and includes about 1,000 U.S. troops currently on the ground there. But on the other hand, President Putin, he wants the exact opposite.
Trump has to choose really here to some extent. He has to choose whether he's going to prioritize the NATO alliance, prioritize transatlantic security and standing with European countries to deter Russia, or prioritize improved relations with Russia.
Now, when President Trump lands here in Poland tomorrow night, he'll likely receive a much warmer welcome than the one that he's going to receive in Germany. That's because Poland, like the U.S., is now run by a conservative government that favors restricted immigration policies and opposes many environmental regulations. It's also one of the few NATO allies to meet its commitment to spend about 2% of its GDP on defense. So there's a lot of similarities between the Trump administration and the Polish government. The question, though, is will they differ on the one issue that matters most, Russia? Molly?
It will be fascinating to see what sort of reception President Trump receives on this second trip. Kristen Fisher from Poland, thank you.
Shortly after news of the test broke Monday night, Trump tweeted, "North Korea has just launched another missile. Does this guy have anything better to do with his life? Hard to believe that South Korea and Japan will put up with this much longer. Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all." This guy presumably refers to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. China is North Korea's economic lifeline and only major ally, and the Trump administration is pushing Beijing to do more to push the North toward disarmament. The UN Security Council was due to hold an emergency meeting Wednesday afternoon to discuss its response to the launch. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley tweeted her frustration at spending her Independence Day holiday in high-level meetings with the hashtag #thanks North Korea. The missile test could invite a new round of international sanctions, but North Korea is already one of the most sanctioned countries on Earth. UN Security Council resolutions ban it from engaging in any ballistic activities. Since late 2012, North Korea has placed 2 satellites into orbit with long-range rockets, each time triggering new UN sanctions on worldwide condemnation. North Korea after new missile test published July 4, 2017. Fox News now playing U.S. confirms Korea successfully launched. ICBM Secretary of State Rex Tillerson vowed Tuesday that the U.S. would never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea, while U.S. and South Korean forces held joint ballistic missile drills after the communist nation successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. Tillerson also called for all nations to fully implement United Nations sanctions against North Korea, saying global action is required to stop a global threat. Meanwhile, the U.S. military said it had conducted a precision firing demonstration off the coast of the Korean peninsula in response to what it called North Korea's destabilizing and unlawful actions. Pentagon spokesman Dana White also condemned the missile test and reiterated that we remain prepared to defend ourselves and our allies and to use the full range of capabilities at our disposal against the growing threat from North Korea. President Trump did not directly mention North Korea or the missile launch during his Independence Day remarks at a picnic for military families on the South Lawn of the White House. However, he did note that we do have challenges, but we will handle those challenges. Believe me. U.S., South Korean and Japanese officials say the North Korean missile flew for about 40 minutes and reached an altitude of 1,500 miles, which would be longer and higher than any similar North Korean test previously reported. It also covered a distance of about 580 miles. A veteran North Korea watcher told Fox News Tuesday that the missile was fired from a mobile launcher, making such tests more difficult for the U.S. to track and disrupt. "This is the big story we have all been waiting for," Professor Bruce Bechtel of Angelo State University in Texas wrote in an email. "All of the paradigms have changed. It is now time to see what action the USA will take." Bechtel added that the mobile launcher nearly destroys our warning time and also means that the North Koreans have a real shot at launching this system at us without us being able to destroy it on the ground. Follow Nikki Haley at Nikki Haley spending my 4th in meetings all day. Thanks North Korea 4:03 a.m. 5 July 2017 1648 retweets 4964 likes Twitter adds info and privacy. Shortly after news of the test broke Monday night, Trump tweeted, "North Korea has just launched another missile. Does this guy have anything better to do with his life? Hard to believe that South Korea and Japan will put up with this much longer. Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all." This guy presumably refers to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. China is North Korea's economic lifeline and only major ally, and the Trump administration is pushing Beijing to do more to push the North toward disarmament. The UN Security Council was due to hold an emergency meeting Wednesday afternoon to discuss its response to the launch. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley tweeted her frustration at spending her Independence Day holiday in high-level meetings with the hashtag #thanks North Korea. The missile test could invite a new round of international sanctions, but North Korea is already one of the most sanctioned countries on Earth. UN Security Council resolutions ban it from engaging in any ballistic activities. Since late 2012, North Korea has placed 2 satellites into orbit with long-range rockets, each time triggering new UN sanctions on worldwide condemnation.
North Korea claiming to have launched its first intercontinental ballistic missile. The regime calling this its final step in its goal of creating a nuclear state that can strike anywhere in the world. And joining me now is Waleed Phares. He's a Fox News national security and foreign affairs analyst, and he has some more information for us. Thank you so much for joining us on this 4th of July.
Thank you.
So how concerned are you about this? We talked about the specifics as released by U.S. Pacific Command today. They said that the missile traveled for 37 minutes. They are claiming that it was an intermediate range ballistic missile. It landed in the Sea of Japan. But also NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, they assessed the missile launch and said that it did not pose a threat to North America. But there was at least one U.S. scientist who examined the height, the distance, and reported to at least the Associated Press that the missile could be potentially powerful enough to reach Alaska. What is your assessment?
Well, according to government, the threat did not yet reach the scope of hurting or damaging the homeland. But if you do projections, if we don't take action, both the United States, their allies, or even with China, then this technology, as we can see it right now, will develop to reach the edges of the territories of the United States. That would be Alaska, maybe parts in the Pacific, and then beyond that, the continental United States. So the projection shows us that this is their intention. So the bigger question now is, are we going to wait for them to reach that level, or are we going to take action in terms of strategies? And the second question, that strategy, should it be American only, or should we associate our allies in the region as well?
Well, let's talk about the strategy first, though, because the UN Security Council, they've imposed sanctions on North Korea since at least 2006. They've stiffened them in response to at least 5 nuclear tests, the long-range rocket launches as well. Pyongyang, though, they continue to threaten yet another nuclear test. You see what they just did yesterday. They don't seem to care about sanctions. They don't seem to work. What do we need to do?
You're right. Sanctions alone never works. You have to have something else, either from the outside, meaning a military pressure, or deterrence, or from the inside, an uprising, as was the case, for example, when the Soviet Union collapsed, or as has been the case in many other places. But the United States at this point in time will have to make a choice, because the technology of North Korea shows that they are closer than ever to reach the homeland. So now the time factor is becoming very important. One scenario, if we do have enough technology to actually, stop the North Koreans from threatening us, which is something we cannot answer because we don't have that information. I don't have that information. But what we know is that if the United States, South Korea, Japan, other allies combined would present a deterrence to North Korea, this is a language that they would understand. Well, of course, you have China as well as another possibility.
And we know that President Trump, Sunday or yesterday, he spoke with both China, he spoke with the Prime Minister of Japan, he also had a meeting with South Korea's new president. China, 90% of North Korea's trade comes through China. So how important is it for all 3 of those Asian leaders to cooperate and work together, specifically China?
Well, first of all, we need to have a proper strategy with our allies, those with whom we have relationship. That would be Japan, South Korea, maybe others in the region. But at the same time, that bloc plus China has a lot of leverage on North Korea. But the bigger question, Heather, is what's in it for China? I mean, would China accept to collapse, to topple that regime, and then South Korea will be the one to benefit, or pro-Western forces will be the one to benefit? Of course not. So the negotiations between the 2 leaders, our president and the Chinese president, are crucial in this matter. They're going to be talking about what would be the situation if that threat is eliminated by China. And that is where the Chinese will have to impose their conditions.
And you and I have spoken, I believe, before about China not even paying attention to or adhering to some of the sanctions as they stand right now.
They're not adhering to these sanctions because they know if they do, then that will be very serious for the North Koreans. But it seems to me and some observers that the Chinese want something from the United States elsewhere. Meaning this is a bargaining chip between the U.S. and China. China will say, look, I'll help you in North Korea, but, don't pressure me too much in other areas. Which areas? South China Sea, other places in Africa? It's to be seen.
You know, and to put it in perspective, and I want to make sure that I get this correctly, back in May, there was a missile launch, and the Pentagon says that that ballistic missile launch in May flew 1,000 miles higher than NASA's International Space Station. This one, the most recent one, was higher and longer than that one. So it's definitely reason to be concerned. Waleed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Earlier Tuesday, the Chinese and Russian foreign ministries proposed that North Korea declare a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests, while the United States and South Korea refrain from large-scale joint military exercises. North Korea views the exercises as preparation for an invasion and has repeatedly demanded their cancellation. It says it needs nuclear weapons and powerful missiles to cope with what it calls rising U.S. military threats. Moscow and Beijing issued the proposal in a joint statement after talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. They urged other nations to create a peaceful atmosphere of mutual trust, to encourage talks between the two sides on commitments not to use force, and to make the Korean peninsula free of nuclear weapons. Regional disarmament talks on North Korea's nuclear program have been deadlocked since 2009, when the North pulled out of the negotiations to protest international condemnation over a long-range rocket launch. North Korea has a reliable arsenal of shorter-range missiles and is thought to have a small arsenal of atomic bombs, but is still trying to perfect its longer-range missiles. Some outside civilian experts believe the North has the technology to mount warheads on shorter-range Rodong and Scud missiles that can strike South Korea and Japan, two key U.S. allies, where about 80,000 American troops are stationed. But it's unclear if it has mastered the technology needed to build an atomic bomb that can fit on a long-range missile.
More now on our top story. North Korea's missile test. U.S. officials have confirmed to Fox News that launch was, in fact, an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM as it's known, and one American scientist is saying it could have the potential to reach Alaska. Former State Department spokesperson Marie Harf joins me now. She worked at the department for years while it was dealing, of course, with North Korean threat. She is also a Fox News contributor. Marie, President Trump has said his patience is over. He reportedly told the Chinese president the U.S. may be forced to act unilaterally against North Korea. So what would that look like? So far, of course, the U.S. has resisted military options.
Well, the military options, let's start there, are not good ones. North Korea today has about 10 to 20 nuclear weapons. They have enough artillery pointed at South Korea that could really take out the entire city of Seoul. So if there are military options being looked at, and I actually think that there probably are, and there probably should be, given this game-changing news we've heard today, they're not great ones. And you even heard in the previous segment General McMaster saying nobody wants to have to take that. So when we look at the landscape of military options, they're not very good, and I think that's one of the big challenges here.
Well, look, the alternative is, yet again, diplomacy. It always fails with North Korea. I mean, go back to 1991. They signed an agreement with the U.S. not to nuclearize. They cheated. We signed a new one in 94. They cheated again. You know, then we've instituted a series of sanctions over the last 11 years. They ignore them with impunity. So, honestly, aren't there two options here? We either undertake a military option directly against him to overthrow the Kim Jong-un regime, or we simply live with the nuclear threat.
Well, I think you just laid out the challenge here and why this is probably the toughest national security issue we face today. And you're right, negotiation is always an option, but I've seen no signs that they're willing to come to the table. I mean, just look at what they did to Otto Warmbier. I mean, this is a regime that is not acting in a way that would lead to diplomacy. So we can do things like shore up our missile defense. I heard Lucas talking about that a few minutes ago. Missile defense is not very reliable, but it's one tool, and we can try and put more sanctions on. Look, the fact that China has said they're complying with sanctions, but yet in the first quarter of this year, they actually increased trade with North Korea. That's a problem. So we need to look to countries like China to put their money where their mouth is.
But China never helps
that.
us. I mean, we have pleaded and begged and tried to twist arms and persuade China for more than a decade, and they won't lift a finger. Yes, for a while, they decided they would not give coal to North Korea, which North Korea badly needs. but they were probably cheating on that. I mean, they're not going to come to our aid, are they?
Well, I think if there's a reason that it's in their interest to do so, they will. They're not going to do this out of the goodness of their hearts. You're absolutely right. So I think we need to do all of the above. We need to shore up South Korea's missile defense. We need to shore up our own missile defenses. We need to take a hard look at military options and what that might look like. And we also need to keep the door open to diplomacy, because at the end of the day, we don't want a situation where we have to act unilaterally. We have to put American men and women in harm's way and have to take a step that may not even have the outcome we want. So this is a very complicated situation. I want to see the State Department and the Defense Department really beef up their Asia experts who can be a part of this. They're not in place yet, and I think that would help the team a lot.
Well, isn't it a good thing that we have the THAAD anti-missile defense system now in place, operational, fully loaded? It uses kinetic injury to knock down a nuclear missile. And all the people that oppose the THAAD system, it's a good thing we insisted on it, isn't it?
That's right. And actually, in the Obama administration, when I was at the State Department, it was one of our top priorities to get that system operational.
Right.
But to be very clear, missile defense, even as good as it is in the, that we develop, is not perfect. And we don't want a situation where the only tool left is relying on this missile defense system that sometimes works and oftentimes doesn't. There's 10 million people sitting in Seoul today that I think would be worried about that.
Which may mean a direct military option is the only alternative if diplomacy fails. Marie Harf, always good to see you. Happy Independence Day. Thank you for being here.
Happy 4th.